a sub-basin committee, but also our work has been longstanding in that we are the governor's interstate water quality entity. And through that forum, the states have elevated their interest in interstate work related to nitrogen and phosphorus, and thinking about ways in which they can reduce runoff, improve water quality through multi-benefit conservation practices, thinking holistically about the value of water, with water quantity, the flow of water, the filtering of water, and uses. So thank you for being with us, and I will turn that back over to Brian and to the UMRBA team. I just don't want to be remiss to thank US EPA. This webinar and this workshop that we're leading to again in this fall are funded through a grant offered by US EPA Office of Water. So thank you to US EPA for funding our work in this effort.
Thanks, Kirsten. Appreciate that welcome. I'll second a welcome to everyone who's coming to participate. I'm looking forward to a relaxed and learning-focused discussion this afternoon. During the presentations, we have a great set of presenters, and during their presentations, I would suggest you jot down your thoughts and questions. We will have brief moments after each presentation for a few questions of clarity, and then we will have a question and answer session at the end of the event. We'll be hearing from Lauren Salvato giving a review of a previous workshop held by the UMRBA. Then we'll hear from Helen Van Beck on cover crop incentives, Director in Illinois Sustainable Agricultural Partnership Initiatives. From Dr. Michelle Perez and Aisha Tapp Ross, a guide to water quality, climate, and economic outcomes, some estimation tools we could maybe all use. And then Jenny Seifert from UW-Madison, tools and opportunities for cultivating watershed leadership. I want to say thanks also to UMRBA colleague Mark Ellis, who's actually flying this WebEx plane. It's very helpful to have a dedicated pilot. So thanks, Mark, for that. Hats off to Lauren Salvato for organizing this and leading the association's work in this sector. I think that's all I have to say at this point, other than to echo comments made by Michelle. If anything along the way is not working well for you, drop a note in the chat box. I'll keep my eye there. Or if necessary, just unmute and say, whoa, something's happening. Because we do want this webinar to be a very useful learning experience for you. So with that, Lauren, anything else I should add before I turn it over to you to give us some background?
Yeah, I just want to, Mark, if you go back to our intro slides, I'm just going to do a brief review of our workshop, our 2022 workshop. Oh, nope, too forward. Go back to, there you go. Thank you. Okay, so just as Kirsten mentioned, we have two parts of this workshop series. We did have one already, and if you weren't a part of that first one, you know, we're maybe just learning about you now and welcome you to this sort of second round. We're kicking off two pre-workshop webinars in advance of the next workshop. But just a brief reflection of our November workshop, we had 75 participants spanning state, federal agencies, private, nonprofit sector partners, and environmental, industrial, and agricultural focuses. We focused our presentations and breakout groups in three main areas: financial, technical, and community social science. So the feedback from our workshop was positive, and we really hope to deliver that again for our next workshop in October, which I will briefly highlight at the end. But without further ado, I think we are ready to kick off with our first presentation. Mark, if you could tee that up for us, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. We'll turn it over to you, Helen Van Beck. If you want to give your little introduction to yourself as you start, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks so much to UMRBA for having me. I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership and some of the exciting resources that we have available. My name is Helen Van Beck. I am a Midwest Program Specialist with American Farmland Trust. But I spend most of my time working as one of the coordinators of the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, or ISAP, as we like to call it. So for those of you who aren't familiar with ISAP, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about our group before jumping into some of the resources. So we are a nonprofit member-based organization. We have 15 members, and we're all working together to promote conservation practices that will improve soil health and water quality in Illinois. The group formed, following the passage of the nutrient loss reduction strategy. So we really use that strategy and those goals as kind of our driving force for our work. Here's just a little snapshot of who our members are. So we've got a great group of, ag commodity groups, some more traditional conservation groups, organizations focused on education, and then some of that more kind of industry and trade associations. And ISAP, we developed a theory of change in 2020. And so we really have 3 core strategies that sort of drive our work. And those strategies are to increase farmer recognition and the economic value of conservation practices, to serve as the clearinghouse for soil health and conservation drainage education, and to accelerate the adoption of conservation practices. And with those 3 strategies in place, we have our desired impact. Our long-term goal is to help Illinois agriculture voluntarily meet the NLRS goals, and also benefit from being part of the climate solution. And so with that sort of big goal in mind, our specific role is to be a platform for disseminating relevant research. We coordinate field days and other educational events. We really work to provide expertise through those collaborative partnerships, being able to speak to certain things based on that great membership that I showcased a few slides ago, and provide resources for soil health networks, education, and outreach. And so ISAP's programs can really be grouped into 4 program pillars, which are listed here. And so our production risk management programs really emphasize the environmental and economic benefits of conservation practices. Our soil health and infield management programs, are focusing on adoption of practices like reduced tillage, cover crops, and nutrient management, while the water quality and edge of field programs are focusing on practices like saturated buffers, constructed wetlands, and bioreactors that help to remove nutrients as they move off of the field. And ISAP is also working to cultivate a network of practitioners made up of agriculture and conservation professionals who are working directly with farmers in Illinois. And so we'll talk about some of those specific projects a little later on in the presentation. But as I mentioned many times, ISAP is working to develop resources. And so just wanted to give a little snapshot of what some of those entail. And so we're working on soil health and cover crop fact sheets and directories, those edge of field practices I mentioned, thinking about climate impacts. And then there's also a few communications projects that we work on in order to better spread those messages, including our website, which has a clearinghouse of resources. We post regular blogs on the website, and we also have a newsletter, The Aggregate, which goes out monthly. And so jumping into some of our incentive directories, we developed a cover crop incentive directory this fall and an edge of field incentive directory this spring. We really got we get questions from farmers all the time about what incentive opportunities are available, and really put this resource together in order to help them sort of compare side by side different programs that are available. So the cover crop incentive program, it has specific description about each program, information about the geography and contract and payment information. There's also a link that takes you to that specific program page. So there's a really good information about each program, and this directory includes 15 programs that are available in Illinois. And the directory also includes a stacking matrix. So all of the programs that are listed in the directory are included on the stacking matrix. And the matrix shows which programs can be combined and which programs are unable to be combined in order to help farmers and farm advisors see where payments can be stacked and farmers can receive more payments for doing similar practices. And the Edge of Field incentive directory has very similar layout. It also includes a stacking matrix, and yeah, it is focused on practices, both conservation drainage practices and surface runoff practices. And then hot off the press, just last week, ISAP has released an overview of voluntary carbon markets for Illinois farmers. This was, created in order to assist farmers and farm advisors in their evaluations of market opportunities that are available in Illinois. It was an update to a resource that ISAP originally published in 2021 that was a comparison table similar to the incentive directories of carbon market programs. And so this has been expanded to include some new markets that are now out in the world, and it includes summaries of 15 different voluntary carbon markets. Each program has its own page, and there's lots of great information. And within the document, it's really easy to go between one program and the other to help farmers be able to compare. What are the data requirements of the different programs? What's the contract length? So they can really understand what they're getting into with each program. And the resource also includes a glossary of terms that are, really common in these markets, but is just helpful to have some understanding of some shared definitions. The tool also includes this great graphic walking through different types of carbon markets, which we get a lot of questions about, especially from farmers of, once I sign off my carbon credits, or once I create a carbon credit, like what happens to it in the marketplace and what are the different kinds of markets. So I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail right now, but it is a great graphic and it's a great resource, and it's included in that overview. And so I just want to share a brief disclaimer that ISAP's goal is to provide farmers with transparent and practical information in order to increase their confidence when they're evaluating these programs. We don't endorse any particular program or company, and we're really just looking to share information within our farmer networks. This definitely goes for the carbon market table, but as well as the cover crop and edge of field incentive programs as well. It's really just wanting to create tools to help farmers understand what programs exist. Let's see. So I'm gonna, I think, shift here. Oh, no, one more exciting thing on the horizon. As I'm sure most of us are familiar, there's a lot of money coming in and additional incentives on the horizon for doing some of these climate smart practices through the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities grants that are currently being signed. A lot of them are in kind of their final round of getting their funding allocated. And so ISAP has put together a webinar series that we're going to start in July, featuring these programs that are offering incentives to farmers in Illinois. And each session in the series will feature 2 programs where they'll have a chance to give an overview of their program, and they'll also walk through a specific farmer scenario so that we can see, if you're a farmer, how would you actually interact with this program and what benefits would be available. And so the series is going to be featuring programs that have a specific, geography in Illinois that are available to Illinois farmers, but a lot of these programs, are offering incentives in multiple states, across regions. So, it's going to be a great opportunity for people even out of Illinois to see what some of these programs are working on and what the engagement with farmers might be like. So stay tuned for that, and you can sign up, you can register on our website. So now I'm going to shift a little bit from talking about incentive programs and talk a little bit more about our conservation story map. We launched the story map last fall, and we are really excited about this tool. It's really designed to showcase conservation efforts that are going on across the state. And so you can see here, this is a snapshot of the map from our website. You can visit the map on our website at this link here. And all of the pins on the map correlate to these 5 categories. So we're highlighting demonstration sites where you can go and actually see some of these practices in place. Farmer profiles of farmers who have found success adopting conservation practices, research that's being done in Illinois, service providers who are offering services that can help farmers transition into some of these conservation cropping systems, and also the ISAP Specialist Network is people who work closely with ISAP or have gone through some of our training programs and can provide some of that advice and technical support. And all of the pins on the map can also be filtered by these categories, which I'll go into more detail here. So as I mentioned, we have our sort of 5 overarching categories, and then all of the people on the map can be filtered by certifications and programs. So if you're looking for a service provider to help you make changes on your farm, but you want someone who is a certified crop advisor or has gone through ISAP's programming, you can filter that category. You can also filter results by selecting a combination of conservation practices, all of the outcomes listed here, and available ag services. The story map also has county-specific data, things like water resources, land use data, and some specific agriculture data that is mostly pulled from the NASS survey. And so we think that this will be really valuable as people are looking to do work in counties or sort of see how counties compare across Illinois. The map also has watershed data that can be toggled on and off here between counties and watershed. And as you can see, it's similar information that is shared at the county level, but with a watershed scope. And the watershed is at the Huck 8 watershed level, which we decided to use because it matches the analysis that the NLRS does when they do their watershed analysis. As I mentioned, the point of the story map is really to share the story of conservation efforts that are going on across the state. And so our farmer profile category, we really want to highlight success stories of farmers who are doing good work on their farm. So each of the pins correlates to a little pop-out profile, and that includes a brief description, all of the practices that profile is tagged with, and then some contact information. And each of the profiles also can, there's the ability to link to an external site. So in Adam's case, we conducted an interview with him and wrote a long profile article talking about his farm and some of the practices that he's using. And that's linked there. But it's really great on the research profiles. You can link out to research findings if farmers have a website that they want to share, or their social media. So it's really a great tool to kind of send people out of the map and see how many connections we can make looking outwards. So that's the farmer profile tab. There's also, as I mentioned, the ISAP Specialist Network. And as you can see, it's a pretty similar profile that pops up, and we've got a great list of people in Illinois who are experts in their field and are willing to share that information with farmers who are looking to make a change. So the big call to action is for you to add your pin to the map if you are working in Illinois or you're working with farmers in Illinois. And you can see there's even some people from Indiana have sneaked in here. We take people who are in neighboring states. Yeah, we encourage people to put their own pin on the map. And so if you go to the website where the conservation story map is held, there's a link that you can click on, and this quick and easy form pops up, and you basically just fill out the information that shows up on that profile. We have a chance to review it, and then we can get you added to the map. So really want to encourage everyone to do that as they're talking with farmers and thinking about good stories that can be shared. And then the next few slides are a little bit of a hodgepodge of different projects that ISAP has going on. So we host monthly calls with the Illinois Cover Crop on Farm Network, or ICON as we like to call it. Monthly discussions on cover crop topics, and there's a Google group for people to stay connected in between the calls and share questions or research and discussion. And we post recap blogs of all of those webinars on our website. And I really just like to highlight that the cover crop directory really came out of discussions that were happening in the ICON calls. Last fall, there were a lot of ISAP members who were getting ready to promote their cover crop incentive programs. And so we held an ICON call kind of as a roundtable for people to share those. And that's really, how this resource was started, is just by forming those networks and sharing that information. And so I just really like to tell that story of the value of having these networks and these shared spaces to learn. And then I wanted to just highlight our upcoming, or not upcoming, we just had our first one a couple weeks ago, but our summer series focused on cover crop cocktails. So yeah, last week or a couple weeks ago, we were joined by Practical Farmers of Iowa to talk about mixes after small grains. And the rest of the summer, we'll be talking about different mixes to help address certain goals. And we're also working on putting together a resource on cover crop mixes that will come out of this webinar series as well. So stay tuned for that this fall. And the best way to stay in touch with ISAP and all the things that we're up to is our newsletter, The Aggregate. We share upcoming events and learning opportunities and new resources to an audience of 2,000 ag and conservation professionals, both in Illinois and beyond. So we really encourage everyone to sign up to receive the aggregate. And also, as people are doing outreach for their events, we're always happy to include things in that newsletter. So you can send those to us at hello@ilsustainableag.org. And just lastly, encourage everyone to visit ISAP's website. On our Learn tab on our website, you can see our clearinghouse of resources. All of our blogs are posted under field notes, past aggregate newsletters, and our story map. And then in our Get Involved tab, there's an events page, a careers page, and yeah, just a good ways to see opportunities that exist in sustainable ag in Illinois and occasionally in the broader Midwest. So if people have questions or would like to collaborate or learn more, yeah, feel free to get in touch. All the contact information is there on the screen.
Thank you, Helen. Excellent presentation. Very informative, very well organized. Does anyone have any questions for Helen? We have a few minutes here before we'll transition to our next speaker. Just go ahead and unmute and maybe even open your video up and ask your question.
Hi, Helen.
Hey,
Great presentation. It's good to see you. I have a really quick question about your story map. I'm curious if you're tracking how it's being used.
That's such a good question, and we do get that often of like how many people are visiting it and those kinds of things. We are working on getting better at our sort of analytics of the website and the story map. So we're not doing a great job of tracking right now how many views it's getting. We are growing as far as the number of pins that are on it, and so I think we're kind of in that stage of trying to get more people to know that it exists. There have been a couple cases where people reach out and they say, I'm looking to find information about someone who can tell me about grazing, and I say, oh well, look at the story map, and there looks like there's someone in your area who can answer that question. So there have been a few cases where it has served its exact purpose, but as far as like sort of broader analysis of how well it's being used, I think that's something for us to do in the next few months.
Great, thank
Excellent.
And if
Thanks,
people,
Jenny.
if people have if people have ideas for ways that it can be, used, or there's things to incorporate, we're always open.
Lauren, you have
And
a
do I have, yeah, I was just gonna ask if I had time. Thank you, Helen. I was just wondering, with the directory, do you have data yet too, or even anecdotal about how that resource has been used and maybe even prompted someone to adopt a cover crop or edge of field practice?
Yeah, we've gotten really great feedback from it. When we, initially published the cover crop directory, it got a lot of media attention. It was, shared pretty widely in ag news. And yeah, our director Chris says that, he heard all the time what a great resource it is and how useful it is. And yeah, I've heard from people who are working like at the soil and water conservation districts just how great it. One time I was on a call with someone and then somehow it came up and they had their paper copy like printed right there and they pulled it up. So it's just exciting to see that, it's definitely has been useful, is something that, was definitely needed by, people working to promote these practices. And I like to tell people all the time, it really wasn't that hard to put together. So if you are not in Illinois and you're thinking about, putting together a resource like that, all it took is just, asking the right people, asking around, what incentive programs do you know exist? And and writing them all up.
excellent. Thank you. Any other questions for Helen? Okay, well, thanks, Helen. And folks, jot down thoughts, ideas. We'll see if additional questions emerge at the end of the webinar when we start to see all three sets of information in front of us. Thanks again for an excellent presentation.
Great, thanks, Brian.
All right, next we have up Michelle Perez and Aisha Tapp-Ross to give us a perspective on some estimation tools, guides to water quality, climate, social, and economic outcomes. Turn it over to you all.
Great. Can you hear me?
Coming through.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Let me make sure that I'm sharing the right sets of slides. Are they coming through?
Yes.
Great. Well, it's an honor to follow my colleague, Helen. And thank you, Lauren and Brian and others from UMRBA for inviting us. Aisha and I are so thrilled to share with you this report that hopefully many of you know about, but we're always surprised that others don't know about it. And so every opportunity to get this out there and into the hands of outcomes quantification users is a great day for us. I'm Michelle Perez. I'm the Water Initiative Director for American Farmland Trust, and Aisha Tapp-Ross is our Water and Soil Health Scientist. And if you don't know already, I don't think Helen mentioned our three-part mission, and that is, as a national nonprofit, we're dedicated to preserving farmland, promoting environmentally sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land, and supporting the next generation of farmers as well. If you don't have the guide yet, Aisha's going to include a link to it in the chat. And if you want to scroll around, if you're a multitasker, please do. And if you want to stay focused on our presentation, we've tried to provide some educational information in addition to information sharing. And we'll share several other slides at the end of the talk. We want to thank our funders for this report, the Walton Family Foundation, the Mosaic Foundation, and the McKnight Foundation for making it possible. All right, and let's see, I'll advance the slides. There we go. So we're going to provide an overview of the guide. We're going to compare and contrast tools and methods, and we'll share tips on how to select a tool or a method that might be right for you. So just what are project level outcomes and why should we try to quantify them? Let's try to do some level setting, get everyone on the same page. in the guide, we actually used a definition of outcomes that came from the Regional Conservation Partnership Project, the RCPP. And that was, I'll just read it out here, outcomes are the measurable environmental, economic, and social impacts of RCPP project activities. Examples of outcomes are pounds of nitrogen runoff avoided, tons of carbon sequestered, cost to producers, number of neighboring producers adopting a practice, decision factors leading to producer adoption of soil health management systems, and etc. That's pretty good, right? So we used it as our defining definition in our guide. And then now on to the question of why quantify outcomes. Well, first of all, it was encouraged and then required by that RCPP program in the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bills, and it is required by EPA's 319 projects, their non-point source pollution control programs, and the Clean Water Act. And if that wasn't enough, you know, aside from those requirements, there are many good reasons to quantify outcomes, and I'm just going to read them off here. So first, we envision that educating farmers about the outcomes they're already achieving from great practice adoption is a great thing. Turning that, you know, their observations and anecdotes into quantitative estimates of benefits can only help the cause. How does it help the cause? Well, it helps make more interesting education and outreach activities because you're able now to feature the outcomes of already adopting farmers and help what we call on the fence farmers or curious farmers figure out like, hey, I want some of that great benefits on my farm. So it might make for even more exciting outreach and education events, although I don't know, the Illinois, the ISAP team is certainly raising the bar for creative outreach events with their cocktails, cover crop cocktails events. That was great. Third, you know, we're hoping that outcomes quantification can help farmers achieve better decision making and get them to yes by running these what if scenarios for them that generate estimated outcomes. We think that all projects that are funded by taxpayer support should attempt to provide a project level estimate of outcomes. And certainly with all of these emerging climate markets, they're needing to support they're needing to support farmers estimate outcomes and estimate credits. And then there's a whole bunch of corporate sustainability programs as well that are trying to reward farmers, sometimes for practices and sometimes for outcomes generated as well. So in a nutshell, the goal of this guide was to enable conservationists to add outcomes quantification to their conservation toolbox. Already in the toolbox are the education and outreach events and materials, financial assistance, and technical assistance. And just imagine how much more cost effective we all might be if we added outcomes quantification to the tools box as well. So we cast the net wide and we reviewed 51 tools and models, and we selected 14 of them tools and 2 methods because they satisfied our criteria. And what criteria, you ask? We established 5 criteria to help us decide which tools to feature in the guide and which ones to mention in the appendices. So first and foremost, we wanted tools that generate quantitative estimates of water quality, climate, social, and economic outcomes associated with agricultural conservation practice adoption. So we excluded index tools and we excluded tools that focused on urban agriculture or best management practices. Second, the tool or the methods need to be available to the public, either for a fee or for free, as long as we could look under the hood rather than a proprietary tool. We excluded those. And we wanted tools that were built for use by conservationists, all of you, or farmers. And fourth, we wanted to make sure that our fellow project leaders in RCPP, 319, UMRBA, the emerging partnerships for climate smart commodity projects, we didn't want any of them to have to be computer modelers to be able to use these tools. And finally, for expediency's sake, we decided to exclude tools that are only available for use in just one state, even if they satisfied all the other criteria. Otherwise, we would never finish our report. So here we are. This is table 1, featuring all 14 tools and 2 methods. So that's 7 water quality tools and 1 method, 3 climate tools, 1 social tool and 1 method, and 3 economic tools. The first thing that you need to know is that we've had 1 name change since the initial publication of the report 3 years ago. EPA's Step L tool has changed their name to PLET, the Pollution Load Estimation Tool, and it was Excel-based and it's now web-based. And the EPA Region 5 tool has been officially discontinued, so we're down to just 6 water quality tools and 13 tools overall. And third, you may be wondering, what is the difference between a tool and a method? Well, we defined a tool as a technical device intended to make the task of estimating outcomes easier. In contrast, we defined a method as a systematic procedure for accomplishing the task of estimating outcomes. All right, so I'm going to ease you into this table featuring water quality outcomes quantification tools. So first we display the tools that are available for use nationally, who developed them and what format they're in. Step L, now called PLET, is a web-based tool. Nutrient tracking tool and Model My Watershed are also web-based tools. And then we display 3 regional tools that are all web-based. PTM app is available in Minnesota and North Dakota. The CAS tool is available in the Chesapeake Bay. Field docs available in the Chesapeake, Delaware Bays, and Western Maryland. And note that the names of all of these tools can be used as hot links. You can go directly to any tool that you like and start searching around their website and looking at their resources if you have the online guide. And now we'll look at the scale and purpose column. So we categorize primary as the scale at which each tool was initially built to work at, and secondary as an additional scale at which the tool can also be used. We used field scale for tools that are built to work with individual farmers to analyze their current or future adoption of conservation practices, while project scale refers to tools that estimate outcomes associated with the project boundary, which could be a county or a watershed, and the term watershed scale for projects attempting to improve water quality of a specific water body within a watershed. And here we are at the final column, and that lists the water quality outcomes that are quantified by the tool and the degree of specificity with which the tool estimates those outcomes. We use the term field specific for tools that require farm production and management data inputs and generate outcomes applicable to the field being analyzed. Tools with site-specific analytical capabilities offer location-based environmental data sets for soil, slope, and weather, and they generate outcomes applicable to only that location. The majority of tools, in contrast, require watershed scale or county scale data inputs to produce generalized estimates of outcomes applicable to the watershed or the county of interest. So, for example, finally, nutrient tracking tool is the only water quality tool that provides field and site-specific water quality outcomes estimates because it requires farmer management information and it benefits from local specific environmental data sets built into its underlying model. The rest of the water quality tools yield generalized estimates of water quality outcomes because they do not ask for field-specific data inputs or from farmers, and most rely on large-scale environmental data sets. So I'm going to go quickly through this one. Here are the 3 climate outcome estimation tools that satisfied our criteria. You can see who they were developed by. Comet Planner is the quickest and easiest. You know it as the 4 clicks and you're done. Generalized estimates of GHG tool from Colorado State and from NRCS. Comet Farm and Field Platform require a lot more field-specific and site-specific information, and they produce more very site-specific yield and GHG outcomes. And you can see all of the different types of outcomes that they estimate. Moving right along, here are the 3 economic tools that we found that satisfied our criteria. All are Excel-based, and the first 2 by NRCS and AFT, the Cover Crops Economics tool and our RSHEC tool, the Retrospective Soil Health Economic Calculator, are available for use nationally, while the third tool, the Cropping Systems Calculator by the Land Stewardship Program, is restricted to use in Wisconsin and Illinois. And you can see they cover a variety of conservation practices, and they calculate economic outcomes a little bit differently, although similarly. And last but not least, we come to the social tool and method. So the Social Indicators Data Management Analysis Tool, or SIDMA, was developed by Purdue and Michigan State Universities in collaboration with EPA Region 5 staff. This tool assists watershed project managers in survey generation, helps them code the results and conduct analyses of the social indicators that can be collected at different stages of the project. The tool is based on the CIPES handbook, which I think is one of the coolest reports I've ever read. I encourage you to all read it if you haven't. It's the Social Indicators Planning and Evaluation System, CIPES, for non-point source management, a handbook for watershed projects. And I think it's applicable to all of the environmental outcomes we all care about. And so we refer to the CIPES handbook as the social methodology in our report, and it offers guidance to project managers on how to plan projects and evaluate the effects those interventions have on important social indicators. And beyond the SIGMA tool, we've taken the guidance from the CIPES handbook and developed our own social surveys using MS Forms or Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, other free online software sites that have no guardrails, so you have to be careful, and they don't have nifty analytical features like SIGMA does, but it enables you to do the work yourself. And in case you're wondering what is a social outcome, here are the great definitions from the CIPES handbook. Social outcomes are social changes needed to bring about and sustain the environmental conditions you were trying to achieve in your project. And they include increased awareness, changed attitudes, reduced constraints, increased capacity, and increased adoption, among other important social outcomes. So I'm going to turn it over to Aisha now. And we have 4 more slides.
All right, thank you. So next, I'll walk you through Table 3, getting into the tool, getting started, and getting to the finish line. This table provides some foundational information regarding the access and data requirements for the featured tools and methods. First is the tool column. Below each tool name is a live link that will move you to the write-up for that tool. Next, getting in. This is how to access the tool or method, whether you need to download a program, sign up for an account, or access via web. And next is getting started. This column provides a snapshot into the first few steps that a user will need to complete to begin quantifying desired outcomes. And last, the getting to the finish line column shows a qualitative scale representing the relative number of steps it would take from start to finish to quantify outcomes. We base this scale on the adoption of cover crops as an example. At the bottom here is the legend showing that 5 in our final column represents a tool with many steps to go through to get to an estimated outcome, while 1 represents tools with very few steps to arrive at an estimate of outcomes. Again, I would suggest reviewing the guiding questions in the Choosing Tools section of this guide to assist in planning your outcomes quantification journey. Do project staff and farmers have the time to gather and process data? Some tools require a significant amount of data that may not be a possibility for your project. Do project staff have access to additional necessary data? Tools such as Step L, now called PLET, have an input data server accessible online to provide access to location-based input data, while others require that data to be sourced by the user. Understanding what data is required for each tool will also help you find one best suited to the project needs. And also, how experienced are project staff at using models and tools and in interpreting input and results data? We wanted to ensure that our fellow conservationists did not have to be computer modelers to use the tools featured in this guide. If you do have staff with that expertise, or if you have funding for external consultants to work on quantification, then there are additional options for you to consider, many of which can be found in Appendix C or D. Note that the descriptions for the 14 tools and 2 methods begin on page 29 of the guide, with each of the 14 tool descriptions following the same format that is noted here. It begins with section A that provides an overview and tool background. Then section B describes the required inputs and analysis options for each tool. Next in C, it details the specific outcomes quantified by the tool, and D highlights strengths and limitations. In E, we provide examples of other conservation projects that have used this tool for quantifying project outcomes. And then each write-up ends with additional supporting and logistical information. AFT's newest effort to create a project and county level water quality and climate outcomes calculator tool for use in Illinois. And note we are open to collaborating with any of you who want to develop this tool for use in your state. And so this is the project by,
I'll just
County
jump in
Outcomes
here
Calculator.
and say this is a super quick and easy, though very coarse, and currently only available in Illinois tool. And we only have cover crops and no-till at the project moment. But Helen and colleagues, Jean Brokish and others, wanted to have a quick and dirty by county, almost the 4 clicks and you're done experience for helping project developers in Illinois quickly estimate both water and climate outcomes at the county level. And so it's a very fun Excel-based tool. And we want to know if you want this developed for your state and for additional practices. So please reach out to me. My email's there, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Aisha.
So to learn more about the guide and the tools within the report, please join us during our monthly Outcomes Estimation Tools Training webinar series. Running from May of this year to June next year, we hope to see you on the first Wednesday of each month from noon to 1:30 Eastern Standard Time, as we host a new tool developer who will provide an overview and demonstration of their tool and field your questions. You can register for the series and catch up with the past 2 webinars by using this link that we'll provide in the chat or these keywords, Outcomes Estimation Webinar Series. You can download the guide by using keywords OET Guide AFT, and you can order a free print copy with keywords AFT Outcomes Tools. We'll provide these links in the chat too. Finally, if you'd like a 1-hour coaching session with us, we would be glad to help you find the right tool for your project needs. Just email me at atapross@farmland.org and put coaching request in the subject line. So thank you for your attention, and please post your questions or comments in the chat, and we'll answer them now or at the end.
Thanks so much, Aisha and Michelle. We have time for some questions of clarity. Anybody have a question for this nice set of presenters? A question comes to my mind, if I could slip in. Is anybody doing a cumulative analysis, quantifying the outcomes of a whole set of practices in any particular area? And in addition, what are the incentives in place to do quantified outcome analysis?
Wow. Brian, thanks for that head scratcher. Yes, I mean, all of the new 141 partnerships for climate smart commodity projects are actually required to monitor. Rather, they're also allowed to model, as this guide provides them with some options, their greenhouse gas emissions, but they're actually required to monitor them as well. So that's the whole new community that has a very high outcomes monitoring standard. There are, EPA puts out success stories on their website of 319 projects that have verified evidence they have improved the water quality in their stream. So there's that whole body of evidence that using agricultural conservation practices can lead to monitored and measured outcomes. And then, in terms of, what are the incentives? The RCPP said that they would prioritize selection of project applicants based on how well based on their promising to measure outcomes and how well they indicated they would be set up to monitor or to model outcomes. So there was some incentive in the community of RCPP projects to get their act together and figure out how to measure or model their outcomes. That's my answer off the top of my head, and feel free others to join in. Those were great questions, and I might have only tackled one. Let me know if you have another question I forgot to tackle.
Yeah, could I jump in and give a quick plug for the STAR program in Illinois, Saving Tomorrow's Ag Resources. They also work to provide estimated outcomes based on the farmers who fill out their free evaluation tool. So the farmers fill out the tool, say which practices they're doing on the landscape, and then STAR reports outcomes for both cover crops and no-till, but also applying phosphorus at below removal rates and using the MRTN nitrogen application rates, which is a tool developed by University of Illinois. So Illinois STAR program, there's also STAR programs in Iowa, Colorado, and apologies if sometimes I forget the other affiliate states.
Lauren just posted something in the text. Do we have time for me to read that and respond
Sure,
to that?
yeah,
I can
yeah,
also
please.
wait to the end.
Go ahead. No, that's fine.
Lauren says, I hear a variety of folks fall on a spectrum that we have enough tools and methods and just need more training and awareness, outreach, or there's room for plenty of more tools and methods depending on your priority scale. Do you fall in a particular area having done this analysis, available tools and methods, or is the question too full of caveats? Oh, you Umbra people ask such great questions. Yes, I can definitely find myself in both ends of the spectrum, but where to be perfectly honest and direct, none of the tools really do a great job of estimating project scale outcomes, right? A lot of them were really, if they were at the project scale, they were developed as a planning tool to answer what if scenarios. And if they were developed at the field scale, then that is really wonderful. And they're focused on site specificity and really powerful data inputs to do field scale analysis. But that is difficult to get you all the way up to the project scale. Hence, AFT developing this Peacock tool, right? We wanted to not go through a dozen steps from field scale to project scale. And we also wanted, we didn't, think that we needed the hydrologic specificity of many of the other project level tools out there, and the time involved to get there. So we did this quick and dirty Peacock project and county outcomes calculator tool. It's in the pilot phase and we want to put it through the red face test. It may be too coarse for some folks to handle, but without anything else to use, and without USDA or EPA saying this is the blessed tool, we're going to have one tool. It is a let 1,000 tools, flowers bloom. And that's okay because competition is important and people are able to respond to a variety of needs. There is no one user case, but there are at least 3 to 4 user cases. And so this guide is trying to help people find the tool that fits your use case.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Bringing such clarity.
Oh, I hope so.
Well, let's transition to our next presenter, and then if there are other thoughts people have, jot them down. We'll bring them forward at the end. So let's hear from Jenny Seifert on tools and opportunities for cultivating watershed leadership.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. As Brian said, I'm Jenny Seifert. I am a watershed outreach specialist at UW-Madison Division of Extension, but I actually don't work just in Wisconsin. I work multi-state. I work under the North Central Region Water Network, and so I'm working across the North Central region. And so the tools that I talk about, that I'm going to be talking about today, do have relevance across that region. And I recognize several names in the participant list, and maybe some of you have heard me talk about some of these before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself to you all, but hopefully we'll learn something new from what I'm going to talk about today. And so, the work that I do is really about supporting the sort of the boots on the ground folks who are implementing soil and water conservation practices. And that really includes conservation professionals who are working out a watershed scale and farmers and landowners. And so I just want to put that in context because that's relevant to sort of the tools that you're going to see. And so I just want to set the stage a little bit before I introduce the tools to you, and then talk about kind of the underlying assumptions of these tools. And the first is really thinking about what's needed to move the needle on achieving clean water goals. And really, when we look at that, I would argue that people are at the foundation of that. So, we need policies, we need financial mechanisms, and we need technologies and practices. All of those are necessary, and the people are necessary to help implement those on the ground. And so really that the people are key to really meeting our goals. Just to sort of emphasize that the importance of people, a few studies have shown, this is from the Soil and Water Conservation Society's Conservation Practitioner Poll, that how important people are in success. And so the polls show that, one of the most consistent indicators of conservation practice adoption. So I'm sorry, I forgot to advance my slide. So that was the pillars for moving the needle on clean water that I was talking about earlier. And now we're here looking at the importance of people. And so basically, what this poll showed is that the greatest indicator, or one of the best indicators of conservation practice adoption is the relationship between a conservation professional and a farmer or a landowner. So really, that is sort of demonstrates that need for sustained relationships to achieve on the ground adoption of practices. And so really, sort of the mantra that I say a lot, and some of you heard me say this before, is that that we really need to be investing more in people to be achieving clean water goals. I think we all can agree. We've done a really great job at investing in research and in the practices, but we are under investing in the people. And so the tools that I'm going to be, and sort of what I mean by sort of investing in people, that includes sort of creating more positions, it includes compensating those positions well, and it includes supporting those people that are in the roles to help them succeed, to sort of stay in their job and have success in their roles. And so the tools that I'm presenting today are really going to get that last way of investing in people, and that's supporting the people who are already in these positions and helping them be more successful. And so one way to think about investing in people is building human capital for watershed management. And human capital is really about the skills, knowledge, and networks that individuals have to be effective in their roles. And I encourage you to check out, if you've not already seen this report, it's Successful Watershed Management in the Midwest Getting to Scale. It really outlines some elements that are necessary for successful watershed management, and human capital is one of those elements. And so who are sort of watershed leaders? When I sort of drop that term here and there, that's who I'm referring to. It includes sort of conservation professionals who are working in a watershed context. So that might include a watershed coordinator, a soil and water conservation district employee, NRCS staff, et cetera. Also includes farmers and landowners. And then one category also includes civic leaders and community leaders. But the tools that I'm talking about today are really focused on the first three. The sort of main way that sort of what these tools facilitate is really sort of facilitating peer learning and network building, and really seeking to empower folks through those avenues. I have a whole separate presentation about the power of peer learning and why it can be so important in sort of making change happen. But that's sort of a presentation for another time. But peer learning, essentially, in a nutshell, is really empowerment. It's really sort of a powerful tool for that learning and empowerment. And so the first tool that I want to put on your radar is the Confluence for Watershed Leaders. And this is a community and a collaborative of people working for healthy watersheds. We cover sort of the Great Lakes, Mississippi River, Red River, Missouri River basins. Is sort of that big region is sort of the area that this the Confluence really serves. And the audience that the Confluence for Watershed Leaders serves includes both watershed professionals and farmers. And this is a growing initiative. We're only about 2 years old, and so we're really sort of we joke that we're sort of building this plane as we fly it. But a lot of our programming so far has really focused on peer learning. There are a couple folks that are here today that are part of the Confluence, in fact. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of those programs that we have underway to sort of support watershed leaders. And one of those is called Life Hacks Over Lunch. And this is a virtual meetup series for Watershed professionals thanks, Helen, I see your comment about loving the confluence. But the Life Hacks Over Lunch is a meetup series for Watershed professionals. We it's more focused on problem solving and conversation and less about presentation. And so we borrow the concept of the hackathon from the computer programming world, where a coder brings a coding problem to a group of coders and they all solve it together. In this case, a Watershed professional brings a challenge that they're experiencing in their Watershed work to the group, and then the group has a discussion around what ways to solve that challenge. And so we've been doing this for about 4 seasons now. We do it in the fall and the spring. We've drawn many people from across the Midwest, it's been really exciting to see the enthusiasm that the Life Hacks Over Lunch has received. And really the purpose of it is really to help connect these individuals. You know, we know that a lot of these folks are feeling isolated in their work, and they want to know what others are doing, what others are finding to be successful, what's not successful. They don't want to recreate the wheel. And so this series is really an attempt to help connect them in that way. Another way we're working to connect folks in the region is through our online community. We use a platform called Mighty Network. So it's a social media. It's like a social media platform, but it doesn't have the crazy ads and algorithms, and it's really focused on Watershed work. And so this is another place where we are facilitating sort of that connection build, or those connections, and so the peer learning. And this is a more sort of asynchronous way that folks can connect online. And then, so that's sort of where I think I want to stop with the Conference for Watershed Leaders. There's more I could say, but I'll save it for a different time. But, you know, another reason why sort of facilitating peer learning when it comes to sort of building human capital is so important is that there's this sort of finding from a lot of research or behavior change is that as peer-to-peer communication is really considered kind of the gold standard for behavior change. And so, you know, maybe that doesn't seem too surprising to you all. We've all been teenagers once and can remember what it was like to experience peer pressure. You know, it has not changed. Becoming an adult is sort of maybe a different flavor, but people can really gain comfort if they know somebody who is doing a behavior and they trust that person. And then stories from peers are really effective for people who are contemplating a change. And peer networks can really be sort of nodes for sharing that information. So that's just sort of some of the science underlying. I'm going quickly through some of the science underlying this peer-to-peer communication concept. And so with that, I want to introduce one of the tools that is helping to facilitate this peer-to-peer communication, and this is among farmers. So this is One Good Idea. And One Good Idea is a clearinghouse of videos and podcasts that feature farmers sharing their experiences implementing conservation practices. It basically is a channel to facilitate farmer-to-farmer learning. And it is a collaboration between extension professionals from several universities in the Mississippi River Basin and farmers. I just want to emphasize this is co-produced with farmers. We have farmers on our design team and on our board, and they really help us make sure that this tool is going to be usable and used by farmers. And just a little bit about sort of One Good Idea is, we're really targeting the movable middle among farmers. And that includes really the sort of the early adopters and early majority. And if you haven't seen this curve before, but this is called the diffusion of innovations, it sort of describes the uptake of new technologies or behaviors within a population. We can probably all agree that we've done a really great job at hitting the innovators, and sort of we're trying to move more into the early adopters and early majority, especially now, to sort of reach that tipping points through the adoption curve. And so some things that we know about the movable middle is that they really want practical information. They often want to know what to do. They want proof that a practice is going to make a difference. Also, early adopters are a really important win for a new practice. They have a lot of influence. They tend to be opinion leaders among their peers. And meanwhile, the early majority will be the followers of those early adopters. And so this is sort of the science underneath One Good Idea, and sort of explaining why we designed it the way it is. And so what you can find on One Good Idea in terms of the videos and podcasts that you'll find there are some specific criteria for allowing them to be on One Good Idea. First, this one hits 2 of them. That's by farmers, for farmers, and backed by evidence. And so again, this is about peer-to-peer, farmer-to-farmer learning. And so each video and podcast must feature a farmer sharing their experience implementing a practice. Also backed by evidence. Obviously, it was a project that came out of land-grant universities, so we care about evidence and providing the information that people can trust. And so we do have a vetting process for our content. We have a content review team it's a mix of sort of extension experts in conservation, as well as farmers who have a lot of experience in conservation, and they help us make sure we have quality control with the content that passes through our filters. And then finally, the other key thing to know about the content you find in One Good Idea is it's providing practical information. So the why is important, but for One Good Idea, it's really about the how, sort of the, what did a farmer do? What successes did they see? What results did they see? What failures did they have, et cetera. So again, it's really helping farmers learn what is working, what's not working, and sort of help to sort of find ideas that they can potentially apply to their own operations. And then the other thing, I think the major last thing to know about One Good Idea is that all of our content is crowdsourced. So we know that there are individuals and organizations out there already who are producing great content, and One Good Idea serves to really centralize this content in one place. I sometimes call One Good Idea the not quite YouTube of conservation agriculture. We aren't sophisticated like YouTube and have a lot of fancy algorithms, but it's sort of hopefully makes this content more easily accessible to farmers where they don't have to get lost down an internet rabbit hole. Our content is multi-state. We mostly focus on the Mississippi River Basin currently, but we are not exclusive to other states. And we are always, because we crowdsource our content, we're in a state of constant growth. Currently, we have over 400 videos and podcasts in the clearinghouse, and that is certainly growing. And if you are among the people who produce content in partnership with farmers, that might be a good fit for One Good Idea. We certainly welcome your contributions. And just a couple of really quick things, a way to think about One Good Idea in terms of how it supports farmers. It's a tool for farmers to get their ideas or get ideas they can trust to improve their operations. And then it's a platform to help amplify what farmers are doing and the solutions they're doing on their operations. And here is all the ways that you can connect with One Good Idea. We have an email. We send bi-weekly emails that sort of have a small sample of the videos and podcasts you can find on One Good Idea. So it's a great way to sort of get ideas directly in your inbox. We are on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I encourage you to share One Good Idea with farmers and colleagues that you work with, and also consider contributing content. We take videos, podcasts, and virtual event recordings, such as virtual field days. And I'm just going to throw all of those links in the chat real quick so you have them. And then I'm going to move on to my next tool. And so just to introduce the next tools, plural, I guess, that I'll be talking about, we're looking at, so One Good Idea sort of is a platform for showcasing farmer leadership in conservation. So now I want to sort of transition to how do we then cultivate farmer leadership in conservation. And so what do I mean by farmer leadership? What does it look like? There's several ways that a farmer can be a leader in conservation. It could be just leading by example based on what they're doing on their operation. It could be peer-to-peer. So they're serving as a mentor, or maybe they're hosting field days on their operation. They could be serving as consultants, such as an advisor on a project. Actually, one of the farmers that Helen showed in her slide is actually an advisor on One Good Idea. So it was exciting to see that connection and see him there. He's great. And then finally, and then sort of the more formal leadership role of decision making could be another way that a farmer could be a leader in conservation. And really sort of what I'm about to tell you, or the tools I'm about to explain to you, are really about helping farmers feel more empowered to be leaders in conservation, as well as find sort of their own entry points for how they would like to lead. So not every farmer is going to want to be at the decision-making level, but hopefully the peer-to-peer feels more comfortable for most folks. So just some sort of assumptions behind these tools for farmer leadership is sort of some of the needs for it. So, we all might know great farmers out there who are already being showing themselves as leaders in conservation. We also know that a lot of these farmers are often tapped to do all the field days, the presentations, et cetera. And so there can be some leadership fatigue as a result. So that's not unique to farmers. Any sort of volunteer effort, you're going to find that fatigue happen. you know, there's a need to sort of sustain group energy. So if there's a group of farmers, such as here in Wisconsin, we have our farmer-led groups, our farmer-led watershed groups. You know, how can we sustain group energy, as well as how can we reach beyond the choir? How can we bring more farmers into the fold and to be involved? And so some of the work that I've been involved with that's sort of underlying this is really, what does it take to make a farmer leader? So I did, as one of the projects that I'm on, we did some focus groups and interviews with farmers, as well as conservation professionals who work with farmer networks, to sort of understand, so what does it take for, what makes a farmer leader in conservation? And these are some of the keywords that came out of that research, that include things like integrity, credibility, humility, leadership commitment. That means a willingness to lead, vision, self-learning. So that means basically this willingness to experiment on their operation, encouraging others, and then stewardship and conservation ethics. So these are just sort of some of the attributes of a farmer leader that might make somebody a good leader. So then one of the tools that exists already to help empower more farmers to be leaders in watershed management is Tap Your Potential. And this is a training to grow farmer leadership in watershed management. Again, it's aimed at inspiring more farmers to be leaders, to really help them find that entry point that they would like to make. And some of the aspects of it, or some of the learning outcomes of it, or sort of learning objectives for it, include increased awareness of how farmers can lead in watershed management, a greater understanding of how water quality problems, greater understanding of water quality problems and the importance of farmer involvement in solutions. We hope that they gain a personal recognition of how they would want to lead, and then a motivation to seek out leadership opportunities and connections. And you know, the thing to know about Tap Your Potential is that we really designed it to be a really sort of turnkey, if you will, training where somebody can just take the training and use it in their own watershed. So it's already done. There are some, you know, sort of local tailoring that you might want to do to it, but it's sort of this ready to go program that you can implement in a watershed to engage farmers in that watershed. And so at the end of this, I will certainly put the how you can find that curriculum in the chat if you're interested in trying it out in your own watershed. Another training that is in development is looking at sort of the what we're calling the core competencies for farmer leadership. And this is really, what are the most important basic skills and knowledge that a farmer might need to be a successful peer leader around conservation. And so the same sort of focus groups and interviews that I mentioned earlier to sort of understand leadership attributes helped us identify these core competencies. And they include sort of 3 categories, you know, subject matter literacy. That includes things like conservation literacy, watershed literacy, and systems thinking. Social capital is the next bucket. That includes things like relationship building, boundary spanning. That just means sort of building relationships outside of your normal circles, and sort of connecting realms. And then civic capacity, that really just means sort of the capacity to be sort of really involved in your community. And then communication skills is the final bucket, and that includes listening, storytelling, and persuasion/understanding audiences. And so with this framework, this is a draft framework, I should mention that, we are developing a new program. It's called the Conservation Farmer Network, and it will really help, it'll be geared towards helping farmers sort of develop these skills and feel more comfortable as peer leaders in conservation. And so we're really focusing on the relationship building and communication skills. So the persuasion, understanding audiences, storytelling, listening, and relationship building are sort of the skills that we're focused on in this training. I don't really want to call it a training. It's more of a program, or like a leadership development program, because we are looking to sort of build a network from it. And that, in terms of, so just the timeline of that, if you're curious, we are developing that program now. We are looking to pilot it in this upcoming winter, and then hopefully after that, shortly after that, it will be ready for public use. And similar to Tap Your Potential, it will be something. It'll be a model, something that people can take off the shelf and sort of use in their own watersheds. And then another aspect of the same project that we're developing that training on is really trying to understand how can we be more powerful with our outreach, and how can we reach more farmers. And so the assumptions underneath this, you know, I work for Extension, and you know, a lot of the outreach to farmers through extension, and I think this is similar for NRCS and for SWCDs, the outreach is really relationship driven. So it's one-on-one relationship building, which is really important. As I mentioned earlier, it's a really strong indicator of practice adoption. But can we augment relationship-driven outreach with data-driven outreach? So this is a big question that we're posing on this project. We're working with, and what I mean by data-driven outreach is, it will become clear in a second. We're working with an initiative called Trust in Food, which many of you might be familiar with. They're an initiative of Farm Journal. And they have access to a lot of data on farmers about their perspectives or their preferences and their behaviors. And so we're partnering with them to sort of we've developed models to sort of really identify farmers who might be potential leaders in conservation, as well as farmers who might be part of that movable middle. And we're developing marketing materials and marketing methods to try to reach those farmers and bring them help recruit them for the program. So recruit them A, for that leadership program that I mentioned, as well as B, for some field days that we'll be doing that will be geared towards the movable middle. And so what I'm showing you here is just some of the draft designs that are so that the outputs of where we're at right now in that journey for developing these campaigns. We had not launched the campaigns yet. But just so if you're curious what they look like, these are some of the outputs that were really actually research informed, the sort of messaging that you see here. All right, and I really finally just want to really touch very briefly on one last thing. I will admit this is not one of my projects. I'm kind of speaking about it on behalf of a couple of colleagues, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but this is more just to put it on your radar. It's called Climate Ready Midwest. Excuse me. It is it's really an initiative to empower extension professionals to lead climate-informed agricultural programming in the Midwest. It's an effort to understand how extension can better incorporate climate into their programming. And an aspect of this, which is I think the most relevant to my presentation today, is what's called Climate Ready Farms. And this is really going to be an assessment tool that farmers can use to sort of understand the readiness of their farm for climate change, as well as sort of providing case studies of farmers who are have climate ready farms. And so that's a really rough way of describing what Climate Ready Midwest is, but it's something I just wanted to put on your radars and encourage you to sort of be on the lookout for into the future. It's relatively new. So yeah, so I think that's all I got. If you want to access any of the tools that I talked about, here's where you can find them. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Excellent presentation. Sorry, I've been mispronouncing your name, Ms. Seifert. So let's open it up for any questions specifically for Jenny to start with, and then we'll open it up for observations and questions for all of our presenters, as well as all of our participants. You may have questions for someone that you see in the participant list. So we'll open it up as wide as possible, but let's stay focused on Jenny for just the moment. Any questions for Jenny?
Yes. Jenny, this is Michelle. That was terrific. What a whirlwind of resources. Thank you for your work and your team's work. I had a question on the leadership fatigue that you mentioned for farmer leadership. I'm wondering, and this maybe is something that I should ask behind the scenes, not in front of, I don't know, X dozen numbers of people, but I'm wondering if what you think of, or what you think the literature thinks of paying farmers for that leadership. And so in exchange for being early adopters, the Farm Bill could pay for that as a thank you, and the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodity Projects could pay for it, and corporations who have goals that want to achieve additionality. So, you know, would paying for that leadership and training others help solve a lot of things, including combating leadership fatigue, but also helping deal with the additionality problem of early adopters, and how we can reward them for their good work, though they're excluded at a lot of times outside of the climate programs that are trying to achieve additionality, those offset programs.
That's a really great question, Michelle, and a very hard question. I don't know what the literature says about it, so all I can say is what my opinion is. And you know, I think that I think maybe paying farmers can work in the short term, but I don't know that it's a long-term solution. You know, what I hear from, especially the farmers that I work with who are taking sort of these leadership roles and really involved, they're not in it for, you know, doing it for the money. They're really in it. I mean, some of them are getting, you know, a stipend or for their involvement in a project, for example, but they're really there because they really care about conservation and they care about other farmers adopting these practices. And so, you know, maybe compensation. I think compensation is always good for, you know, sort of honoring the time that a farmer might be putting on a project. But I don't know that it would be a primary motivator for everybody to be involved. I do think that, I mean, obviously the farmers that I'm thinking of are farmers who are already leaders. And so, so, you know, would the money sort of help attract different farmers or new farmers? It's certainly worth experimenting with and seeing if that could be helpful. But, you know, I do think that there is a, you know, I don't know that it would be like a primary motivator for a lot of farmers. I don't know. That's my opinion based on what I've experienced and learned from other farmers.
Sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jenny. Other questions for Jenny? I have one, Jenny, before we open it up to the wider questions for everybody. You mentioned, I think early in your presentation that the role of agricultural consultants, crop consultants, is notable in terms of the ways in which farmers adopt practices. And then you focused in on the presentation about peer leadership and farmer to farmer. Could you step back and give us a little sense of what you think the role of the agricultural consultants are in adoption of these practices, and who is influencing that community and the practices they're suggesting farmers adopt?
Yeah, I think, you know, ag consultants. So yeah, the folks that I was really talking about were really, you know, conservation professionals. So, you know, who are working at, you know, counties or SWCDs, et cetera. But I think ag consultants do play a really important role. And I think that they could, you know, they play sort of in terms of the importance of the relationship that I mentioned earlier. I think they play an equally important role in cultivating those relationships that can lead to that practice adoption. And so I do think that there is room for inviting inviting ag consultants into this work and sort of being involved and sort of learning from these networks, because I do think that they have a really, you know, a lot of farmers are listening more to their seed dealer than they are to their extension educator. And so I think that the more that we can engage that audience in these kinds of conversations and in these networks, I think we'll be more successful.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, let's open it up more widely to all of the presenters. And again, not just questions, but observations and perspectives participants may have on the subjects that were talked about here today, or even questions of each other. So let me open it up and see.
Can I ask a question, Brian? Jenny, I guess
Sure.
maybe this is too far out in the future, but like once we're past the middle of the bell curve, like what do you think your tools look like? I mean, you know, you would need to be supporting a different set of people that perceive risk differently. Is it too soon to tell?
Yeah, I feel like it's too soon to tell. I mean, I think the assumption is that, I know that Adam Reimer's on this call, so I'd love to hear his perspective on this too. But I think, you know, kind of the assumption of that diffusion of innovations curve that I showed you is that, you know, if we can saturate that early majority and hit that tipping point, and then a behavior becomes a norm within a population. And so maybe, you know, there's less sort of targeted work happening to those later folks, because hopefully the behavior becomes a norm enough that it's like that everyone's seeing their neighbors do it and they feel like they should be doing it too. You know, I do think that there's a lot of more similarities between the sort of two halves of of the fat part of that curve, the early majority and the late majority. You know, I think that some of the tactics that you used with the early majority will work with the late majority. So, I mean, you know, I think it's just more you know, how do you, it's more of, how do you reach those folks? Like, how do you get to those folks? But I feel like the methods might be similar, but I'm really curious what Adam Reiber would say. I don't know if he's still on the call, but.
Adam has just offered something in the chat. Adam, do you want to give your voice to it as well?
Yeah, I can add some thoughts. I mean, I think so. Just to elaborate on what I put in the chat is that the idea of the tipping point, and once a practice or a way of approaching farming becomes the norm, the role of outside groups. I mean, there's always gonna be a need for technical resources, financial support to help alleviate those like kind of field scale barriers. But in terms of the social aspect, it's the farming communities themselves that enforce those norms. And in fact, it can be, I think, counterproductive to have outside groups continuing to push on practice adoption once you've kind of gotten into that middle of the curve, as we say.
Great, thank you, Adam. Appreciate that additional thought. Suzanne, you picked up a thread that Michelle was offering in terms of compensation. Do you want to give your voice to what you entered in the chat box for just a moment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if you're new to this whole sphere of being sort of a presenter and leader, it might be, you know, it's a steep learning curve. I feel like you should be compensated for the time you spend getting up to that stage, and maybe for some of the time you're putting into things like going to conferences, giving presentations. I mean, I know many of those leaders are out there in our communities, and I'm always wondering how they manage to, you know, keep their own operations going with all this, you know, all these demands. So that's all.
Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate that. Other thoughts and perspectives, participants, either a perspective you want to offer or a question you want to ask? Well, I have one for all the presenters, if you will, because a lot of the photographs we saw were of white male farmers. And so I'm curious about how the demographics of farming is changing, and how well, and what your experiences are in connecting with operators who aren't white males. Either women who are inheriting farms or going out there and doing things, white women, or Black farmers or Asian farmers, diversifying farm communities, a lot of folks coming up from Central and South America. What's your experiences with the changing demographics and their ability to adopt these practices? Michelle, what do you think? You're a pretty articulate person. Do you have any sense of how demographics are playing in this conversation?
I'm definitely shaking my boots, Brian. I have no idea. This is not something I know anything about, despite being half Filipino and half German Russian from Colorado. So I represent sort of that demographic, but I don't know anything about it. And you know, I think all of the federal programs and many of the corporate sustainability programs are really, it's a, pardon the term, come to Jesus moment, right? And so they're really prioritizing funding, technical support, and outreach to socially disadvantaged farmers, if we can use that big umbrella term. And so that's a great thing. And so I think hopefully everyone is recognizing that we have to go through the gatekeepers. There are lots of trade associations that represent Black farmers, other racial groups, other countries of origin farmers. So we have to, if we're not an institution that's used to interacting with folks who are not white and not male and not landed, we need to talk to the folks who know how to talk to those folks before we try to market our programs to those folks. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
And I'm
Michelle,
looking forward to
appreciate
learning
that.
from everybody else.
Any other responses to that generalized question? How are the demographics of farming changing, and how well are we moving these programs out to the different demographics within the farming community?
Yeah, I can jump in. Thanks for that question, Brian. I think obviously there is a big need and a lot of room for growth and improvement, I think, in our work and engaging communities who historically haven't had access to some of the programs that we're talking about. And yeah, are becoming more and more the farmers who we need to be working with. I'll just give a shout out to AFT has a great program, our Women for the Land program, with engaging women farmers and landowners. And we know that the studies show that women tend to be more interested in conservation and helping to advance that. And so that was a program that actually started in the Midwest, the AFT's Midwest team, and has since expanded, and they're doing great work. And internally at the AFT's Midwest team, we're talking, a lot about how we can work to increase that program and support women farmers and landowners. And then, another part of what AFT works on, spends a lot of time working on is land access. And so thinking, about everything that's wrapped into that too. And thinking about, this big turnover of land ownership that we're about to see in this country. And I think there's really an opportunity to be intentional about making sure that everyone has access to those opportunities as they come up.
Helen, a quick follow-up. What I'm not familiar with this notion of a significant shift in ownership that you just mentioned. What is that? Do you have a sense of that?
Just that, farmers as our current group of farmers are aging, and farmland is going to get passed down to the next generation. And so, thinking about what that process looks like, and whether that gets passed down to the next generation within a family, or to a different family or a different community. Just thinking that there is going to be some sort of exchange, and I see an opportunity there for more communities to have access to land who haven't previously.
Great, thanks, Helen. Katie, you have a chat, another reason maybe to think about compensation, because it opens up to a broader demographic. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. It's not my area of expertise exactly, but this is something that we're thinking about. So I'm with TNC, and we're thinking about in general for community-led conservation, whether it's in the agricultural landscape or otherwise. And there's actually a pretty good resource that I use. So I work in the Northeast a lot. And this is definitely applicable to places like Vermont, which has high agriculture in their landscape, but we're also thinking about it more broadly. And there's a resource that TNC has put together called the Voice, Choice, and Action Network and Guidance, which there's a lot in the presentation that we just saw that has some similarities. And one of the things that we're thinking about is how to sort of raise up community leaders and support community leaders. And one of those things is compensation, because a lot of times people don't participate because they simply don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the time. So the Voice, Choice, Action Network is actually focused on Indigenous led conservation, but we don't have a lot of that in the Northeast. It's kind of a global guide. So it's for Indigenous and community-led conservation. So sometimes the communities look different. Anyways, something to think about. It's something that I think there is literature out there on this actually, though it's not, I'm a river scientist, so I think about people because I have to, but it's not my main area of expertise. But thanks. Yeah.
No, thank you. Appreciate the thoughts. And Suzanne, you picked up a thread that Helen offered about the non-landed folks. Could you speak to that a little bit? You have that group is focused on climate smart practices. Was that
Also
the
not my
nominator?
area of expertise, but lately I've been rubbing elbows quite a bit with this Climate Land Leaders Group, which is a new organization that I know focuses a lot of their work on finding non-operating landowners, a lot of whom are women, but not all, or who may have, inherited farmland or whatever, who want to promote climate smart practices. So, and again, they're trying to cultivate leadership, just like some of what Jenny was talking about. But the question of the historically underrepresented community, which is both women and people of color, is tremendously important to USDA at the moment. And I think, as Michelle was saying, you need to connect with the organizations that are able to pull together and represent some of those groups, because many of them, these are, if they're beginning farmers, they maybe have like 5 acres and they're cultivating some vegetables from like the Horn of Africa, for example. They don't have the resources to engage themselves with these sort of broad networks in which we operate. So you do need to find the sort of aggregators or spokespeople.
Thanks, Suzanne. Appreciate that. And I take it as a mark of success for this webinar that many of you are prefacing your comments with, this is not my area of expertise. So we're all moving into a zone of learning together. So I really appreciate the willingness to share inside this webinar emerging ideas, things that we're not quite sure of, but we think they might be relevant to the conversations we're having. So thanks for that courage. Other questions or perspectives people want to offer or ask of each other and these fine slate of presenters at this point? Well, if not, I have one more area. Although, Helen, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for Jenny on the Conservation Farmer Network and the pilot with that, of what the geography is going to be like for that kind of first group.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have 3 pilot sites. We have a site in a watershed in Wisconsin, one in Indiana, and one in Arkansas. So this project's a partnership between UW-Madison, Purdue University, and University of Arkansas, as well as obviously Trust and Food. So that's where we're piloting it, and then obviously it would be available for other watersheds once we put it out in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, AFT is really interested in seeing more producer-led watersheds in Illinois. So yeah, looking forward to see what comes out of that.
Cool.
That pilot.
So one set of actors that you all have mentioned sort of at the side, the periphery for all 3 of the presenters. What role or what experience have you had in observing the role of the purchasers of product influencing the way the operators or producers are operating in the landscape? For example, in the voluntary sustainability standards world globally, purchasers of products are being asked to pay a price premium for the adoption of a sustainable practice by an operator. And I think that's what we're talking about here in sort of a Midwest context. And we heard from the Prairie or Practical Farmers of Iowa presentation a couple of weeks ago about how Pepsi-Cola is paying a little bit of a cost share for cover crop experimentation in a particular grain shed that they're operating in. What's your experience with the role of purchasers and how they might influence the adoption of these conservation practices? And I open that up to anybody who has any thoughts on that.
I'll jump in. I think that's a great
Helen.
I think that's a great question. I think that we see a lot of interest from purchasers wanting to be able to say this product was grown XYZ way, and also wanting to be able to share some of those outcomes. And that's something that I was thinking about when Michelle and Aisha were presenting, of like, what's the benefit of being able to share these outcomes? I've seen companies that are looking to be able to, report on those outcomes, and also just to be able to say that certain practices were being used when growing the grain, for example. And then I think too, when we look at the carbon markets, it's not just companies in the ag and food supply chain, but it's outside companies too. So, these corporations have a lot of money, and they're getting pressured from the consumer, and they're getting, rightfully so, getting pressured to reduce their carbon emissions. And so I think that there's really an opportunity for some of that money to make its way into the farmer's pocket for doing some of these practices.
Excellent. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, it makes me think of Delta Airlines, who wants to say they're carbon neutral. They invest in carbon sequestration, grain growing in the Midwest. Thanks for that. Any other thoughts on the role of purchasers of products and their influence on how those products are produced? The adoption of conservation practices?
Maybe I'll say one more thing, Brian, is that your point about Delta and biofuels, reminds me that we have a project going on at AFT in the Midwest right now. AFT is partnering with Argonne National Laboratory to think about what crops can be grown in order to produce biofuels. And so obviously, from AFT's perspective, we're interested in kind of the crop diversity and seeing more crops on the landscape. But yeah, there needs to be markets for those to be purchased. And so I think, that's a good example of where, like, when there's, interest from buyers, that then we see some of these benefits on the ground too, from things like crop diversity.
Thanks, Helen. Great thoughts. Well, we have a few more minutes. Any other final thoughts or observations anyone would like to make before we turn it over to Lauren?
Well, if I could just ask a question, because I guess I just maybe wanted to preface, like, from our last workshop, there were these really great ideas that came up, and I noticed some of them were maybe hitting on projects that were in development, or maybe just things that we didn't know of. So, we're all in our different spheres. We serve different purposes. We have different values, and any thoughts on how we better connect the work? Because, like, the resource that Katie threw in the chat, I wasn't aware of, and it's hard to keep up with everything that's out there. So just curious, from where you're sitting, if you have any tips. I think that would be great.
Jenny, Michelle, Aisha, Helen?
Yeah, I mean, half the things that were shared today in the chat I didn't know about. So I clicked on every one of them, and I'm, bookmarking all of them. So I really felt this was a really excellent use of time and learning from my perspective. So I'm really grateful. I guess, more sharing through all of those really cool social media conversations that many of you have, and the Confluence conversations, those hackathon thingies. So yeah, just keep on circulating all of the resources all the time. And thank you for this opportunity to circulate a now 3-year-old report that hopefully is still very, very relevant, right? So don't give up on your resources. There's still somebody who still needs to see them.
Thanks, Michelle. Excellent thought.
I'll just put a plug in. I mean, the Confluence for Watershed Leaders does have a resource library. So it's a crowdsourced resource library. So I know we recently put the outcomes tool that Michelle was talking about in there. And so, offer that as one place that, if the audience is, conservation professionals and watershed leaders and farmers, then that's a place. But I just want to also sort of emphasize what Michelle was saying is, I think I often hear people sort of daydream about creating directories for things like this, and the realities of those is just they're really hard to create and maintain over the long haul. But I think, like, it's like this, where there is sort of peer learning happening here, and I think the more we can do connect in these venues, I think that's how we really learn about all this stuff.
Thanks, Jenny. Anna, you just put a very interesting comment in the chat. Would you give voice to it, please?
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so working with vegetable and potato producers, some of the processing plants, such as McCain's, will conduct sustainability audits on an annual basis. And I've asked producers what are included in sustainability audits, and they say that there really are no guidelines. So whatever producers would like to include in the sustainability audit is what the processor, which is the initial buyer, accepts. And then a producer had approached me, and this producer is in a producer-led watershed protection group. And he asked that we consider creating water stewardship plans for producers in the producer-led watershed group. And I think he was looking for that to be a good faith action, not only towards protecting water quality in the watershed, but also to play into those sustainability audits. So he had mentioned that, McCain's sells, potatoes to McDonald's, and McDonald's is looking to have, a stamp of sustainability or something on their product for consumers. So.
That's excellent, Anna. Thank you. And
Yep.
and that does bring in a term I haven't heard yet very much, at least the whole notion of sustainability and sustainability audits, which should play into Michelle's and Aisha's work in terms of quantifying outcomes, connecting to what we think sustainability might look like. So that's a great comment. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Anything else before we turn it over to Lauren to bring this webinar to the dock gently, and we can all then disembark and go on to the rest of our days? Final thoughts from anyone?
I guess, on the issue of sustainability, the latest and greatest report from ISEP that Helen highlighted really is a tremendous resource for anyone who wants to come up to speed really quickly on all of these corporate sustainability programs like Pepsi that you mentioned, Brian, and others that are, one step further. They're actually voluntary inset programs, and then one step further, they're voluntary offset programs. And, if you've heard these terms and they're still sort of buzzwords from you, there's great definitions there. So it's a really great resource. And I hate to jinx it, but we're also coming up with a new resource that may be called Top 10 Things You Wanted to Know About the Ag Carbon Markets, but We're Afraid to Ask. And that'll be coming out in the early fall. So we're learning from all of you and trying to put together a farmer-facing and conservation professional-facing document that helps answer, like, what are these things, coming to incentivize me?
Michelle always wins for the best titles and the best acronyms. So I can't wait to read 10 things I want to know, but I'm afraid to ask.
Thanks, Helen.
Well, as I turn it over to Lauren then to bring this webinar to a close, I'll just say thank you very much for all of the great presentations and for the really rich dialogue and question and answer. Thanks so much. Really appreciated the opportunity to facilitate it. Let me turn it over to Lauren to bring us home.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, just real quick, we have another webinar, and it's going to be 1 to 3 p.m. Central on September 13th. My colleague Mark just put that in the chat, open to all. So we are going to be talking about bipartisan infrastructure law and all these new funding sources that we didn't previously know about that actually work towards conservation practices, multiple benefits. For example, 604B funding. Just hoping to kind of draw a light on maybe what's not well known about these funding sources and in their increases. And so that one's that. Again, feel free to look at the event with all the connection information in September. And then finally, we have our October workshop coming up. This one is by invitation only, but just reach out to me if you're not on the invite list. It's not meant to be exclusive, more just so we can kind of keep our arms around how many people actually show up. But at any rate, we're focusing our second workshop on leverage points of change, which are so small tweaks within the system that can produce big changes in everything. I've been using the example of financial leverage point as a batch and build out of Iowa. A partnership and leadership leverage point is our producer-led watershed groups out of Wisconsin. There's many more examples of like that, and that's what we're talking about doing. So my colleague should also have put info in the chat there. Feel free to reach out to me if you aren't on the invite list, but if you are, you'll be getting emails from me periodically. So yeah, Brian, that's all I have. Those were just my last two closing slides. I think we can close it out if you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much again for spending the last 2 hours with us. It was certainly rich and filled with learning for me. I hope it was for you all as well. Lauren, thanks for organizing it and leading it. Great job as always. And enjoy the summer. Living is easy, right? In the Midwest in the summertime. So
Except when it's
Everybody.
good air quality.
yeah, exactly.
Red.
Got to get
So
those Canadians.
Derecho just moved across the whole state of Illinois, so we'll
Uh,
see if summer living stays good and days of climate
Right.
change.
It's a crazy life. Thank you all very much. Excellent work. Gives me faith. You all
Thanks,
give
Brian.
me
Thanks,
faith.
Lauren. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for organizing.
Bye-bye.